She walked into the room as the maid's daughter. She left owning everything they thought was theirs. This is the story of how one quiet girl changed the fate of an entire empire. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Denning and Whitmore law firm, casting reflections on the marble floor that made everything inside feel cold, distant, and clearly not meant for someone like her. Amara Johnson, 17 years old, black, wearing a faded sky blue dress worn thin from too many washes, stepped into the room like a stranger in a foreign land. Her natural curls were neatly tied up, her face bare. Among the polished shoes and $1,000 suits of the Whitmore family, she looked like a stain on pure silk. "Is this a private meeting or a janitor convention?" a voice called out. It was Troy Harold Whitmore's grandson, smirking from the end of the table, followed by a few snickers. Amara didn't respond. She was used to this. The sting of contempt wasn't new. But today she wouldn't flinch. Not now. She kept her gaze on the one empty chair near the lawyer's desk, the only seat unclaimed. And then quietly she walked toward it and sat down. "Excuse me, who allowed her to sit there?" Veronica, Harold's younger sister, raised her voice like Amara's presence polluted the room. Amara remained silent. Not because she didn't have a voice, but because she had promised her mother she wouldn't lose her temper, that her silence today would speak louder than any insult. As the antique clock struck 10, the door opened. A tall man with silver hair and kind eyes entered. Charles Denning, Harold Whitmore's personal lawyer for over 30 years. Nobody greeted him. They were too busy glaring at Amara like she was a weed in their manicured garden. Charles set his leather briefcase on the table and scanned the room. Then he looked at Amara. "Miss Amara Johnson," he said with quiet respect. "Thank you for being punctual. Please have a seat next to me." Silence dropped like a bomb. Clark nearly spilled his drink. Vanessa stopped scrolling her phone. Veronica froze, their gazes locked on Amara like she'd just been named Air. And suddenly the air changed. "Excuse me." Clark stood up, fury in his voice. "Do you even know who she is, Mr. Denning? This is a family reading, not some staff appreciation day." Charles didn't even blink. Instead, he opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, placing it carefully on the table. He then tapped a hidden button on the wall. A hidden screen flickered to life. There Harold Whitmore appeared, pale and worn from illness, but with that same unshakable intensity in his eyes. "Hello, my children," Harold began, voice hoarse but steady. "If you're watching this, it means I've passed." He paused. "I want to start with a simple question. Can anyone here tell me the name of Delilah Johnson's daughter, the woman who cleaned our homes for 18 years? Silence. Troy glanced around nervously. Veronica busied herself adjusting her nails. Not a single person spoke. As I expected, Harold's voice continued, heavy with sadness. "Her name is Amara. She's worked in this home since she was 12, helping her mother every weekend. And none of you, not one, ever bothered to learn her name." Amara lowered her gaze, biting her lip as Harold's voice poured through the room. "I watched you over the years," he said. "How you spoke to the staff, the nurses, the drivers like they were invisible, replaceable. But Amara, she was different. She remembered those breaks in the library, stolen moments when Harold would say hello, ask what book she was reading. She never imagined he was watching. She took care of her mother while studying it at night." Harold continued. "She read every book in my collection and never once asked for anything." Across the room, Veronica's fists clenched. Vanessa looked away. Then came the words that changed everything. "Harold Whitmore leave 52% of Whitmore Industries, along with all my properties and personal assets, to Amara Johnson." No one could breathe. Amara sat motionless, hands trembling. But deep inside, something ignited, not joy, not revenge, but a fire made of justice. "This is outrageous," Troy bellowed, standing so quickly his chair slammed backward. "A black maid's daughter inheriting everything. This is a joke." "Shut up, Troy," Veronica hissed, not out of concern for Amara, but fear of what was coming next. "This is manipulation," Clark snapped. "She took advantage of him." In his final days, Charles opened a new page from the will. "There are conditions," he said calmly. "Amara will not take direct control until she turns 21. Until then, the company will be overseen by myself and Dr. Arm." Lydia Monroe, a close observer of Amara's development. Just then the door opened. In stepped a poised black woman in a tailored gray suit. Her eyes glistened with quiet pride. "I'm Lydia Monroe," she said. "I met Amara at the hospital cleaning the hallway while her mother battled late-stage cancer. What I saw was a daughter any parent would be proud of." The room fell into stunned silence. And for the first time, the Whitmore family felt something they had never associated with Amara Johnson. Fear. Amara stood, not out of fear, not out of impulse, but because she knew if she didn't speak now, they would forever see her as the help. Her voice wasn't loud, but each word struck like lightning. Your family built nothing, she said, locking eyes with Troy, then Clark, then Veronica. Harold started this empire from a fruit stand. He built it with his hands. You inherited his name and used it to step on people. Veronica's face turned crimson. Troy took a step forward, eyes flashing, but for once words failed him. Amara turned to Mr. Denning. I'm ready, she said quietly, though her voice trembled. She hadn't come here to ask for favors. She came to reclaim what was just not for herself but for her mother, and for everyone who had ever been made to feel invisible. That day her silence ended, and her legacy began. No one expected it. A black girl once ordered to mop floors and stay out of sight was now the rightful heir, backed by signed documents, video testimony, and a renowned legal team. We'll fight this, Clark growled. No judge will allow this circus to stand. Denning didn't blink. Mr. Harold anticipated that. His will passed through 3 legal reviews. And if necessary, we have 17 recordings, documenting each of your actions over the past decade. Vanessa began to weep, not from guilt, but from knowing that their secrets, their cruelties would soon be public knowledge. Veronica turned to Amara, her voice brittle. You think a few compliments make you understand him? Harold once said I was his light. Amara didn't flinch, but her eyes glistened. Because the truth was real light doesn't shine from chandeliers or cocktail dresses. It shines from those who fight quietly without applause. And that's something the Whitmores would never understand. Mr. Denning pulled out a flash drive. Before his death, Harold recorded another message. He asked me to play it only if his will was challenged. The room dimmed as the screen lit up. Harold appeared weaker but determined. If you're watching this, he began, it means someone in this room is still trying to claim what they didn't earn. He paused, his breathing heavy. I wasn't manipulated. I sought Amara out. I offered to pay her tuition and she refused. It took weeks to convince her, because she didn't want to take anything tied to a family that once humiliated her mother. Harold turned fierce. Clark, you berated a driver for being 5 minutes late. Veronica, you fired Delilah for missing one day to take her child to the doctor. Troy, you spit on Amara when you thought no one was watching. Gasps filled the room. This isn't about blood. It's about character. And Amara has more than any of you ever did. The screen faded, and for the first time no one had anything left to say. Silence thickened the air like fog. Not everyone knew what it meant to live in the margins, then suddenly be thrust into the center. But Amara did, and she felt every pair of eyes on her, no longer mocking but cautious, some afraid, some unsure. Mara Denning said gently, as per Harold's wishes, you won't take full control until 21. But starting today, every board decision must go through you. Clark slammed his hand on the table. She hasn't even gone to college. She doesn't know finance, corporate law management. This is madness. Before Amara could answer, a voice echoed from the doorway. I'll train her. All heads turned. A black man in a gray suit stepped forward, salt and pepper hair eyes steady. I'm Marcus Reed. I was CFO here for 25 years. Fired after I proposed profit sharing for entry-level workers. Dead silence. For the first time, the ones who always spoke had nothing to say. Amara stepped out of the boardroom and into the blinding Los Angeles sunlight. But this time she didn't feel like a stranger. Beside her walked Marcus Reed, a man once silenced for defending the workers. And behind them, Dr. Lydia Monroe, the first to see something in Amara when she was just a girl scrubbing hospital floors. You don't have to do this alone, Lydia whispered, hand gently on Amara's shoulder. We'll rebuild this together. Not just this building, but the broken systems inside it. Amara nodded. Her heart didn't race with fear anymore. Not anger either. What burned inside her now was clarity. She didn't want revenge. She wanted reform. And from that day on, Whitmore Tower, once a monument to greed and elitism, began transforming into something else entirely. Something just. 6 days after the will reading, Whitmore Tower no longer echoed with quiet detachment. Whispers flooded the hallways about the black girl who inherited the empire, while the board rushed to schedule an emergency meeting. Amara walked into the room flanked by Marcus and Dr. Lydia. No need for introductions, their presence alone shifted the atmosphere. Amara stood at the head of the table, voice calm but resolute. I'm not here to wear a crown. I'm here to repair what's been broken for far too long. She placed a thick red folder on the table. Inside was a list of nearly 300 employees terminated over the past decade. No severance, no explanation, no dignity. We begin here, she said. Each name will be reviewed for reinstatement and proper compensation. A senior VP scoffed. You know this will upset the shareholders, right? Amara didn't flinch. I'm not afraid of outrage. I'm afraid of silence in the face of injustice. And with that, the first fortress of old power began to crack. As Amara set reforms in motion, Troy, the cousin who once laughed the loudest, was plotting from the shadows. He convened his secret meetings with old guard investors, whispering venom. She'll tank this company, he said. 17 inexperienced, idealistic. She's going to drag us all down. But what Troy didn't know was, Amara already knew. An intern he had once humiliated, called invisible in front of an entire elevator, had sent Marcus a recording of Troy's private conversations. That afternoon, Amara called a board meeting. She entered silently, confidently, holding a flash drive between her fingers. Before we continue, she said, I'd like you to hear something. Troy's voice echoed through the speakers. His mockery, his schemes, his disdain for Amara and for justice itself. The room went dead still. No one defended him, not out of fear, but because, for the first time, they were ashamed. And Amara. She didn't smirk. She didn't retaliate. She just sat there, a girl who had once been told to clean up after the powerful, now quietly, irreversibly becoming one of them. 2 weeks later, while reviewing overlooked employee records, Amara saw a name that made her heart clench: Elijah Green. A security guard for 27 years, Elijah had once been the first to greet her and her mother every morning. A warm smile, a kind word, a man who brought her a cupcake every Christmas, even when they had nothing. He'd been fired 5 years ago, downsizing, they called it. No thanks, no pension, just erased. Amara called him in, but when he arrived, she froze. Elijah now sat in a wheelchair, paralyzed from a warehouse accident just months after his dismissal. No insurance, no support, no acknowledgement. Tears welled in Amara's eyes. I'm so sorry, Mr. Green, she whispered, her voice trembling. That afternoon, Elijah was reinstated not as a guard, but as senior advisor for safety and employee welfare. As he rolled down the hallway, employees rose from their desks, not because of his title, but because, for the first time, someone had made the unseen seen again. One afternoon, the company cafeteria buzzed with quiet tension. Amara walked in, no entourage, no blazer, no announcement. Just a plain dress and a lunch tray in her hands. Employees whispered. Some looked away, others stared. She joined a table in the back where cafeteria workers and custodians ate. They scrambled to stand, but she smiled and waved them down. No need, she said. Mind if I sit here? They hesitated, but after a moment, someone laughed. Another passed her the salt, and soon Amara was laughing too. She asked about their families, their stories. She remembered their names not from HR files, but from nights she spent memorizing the people who made the building run. One elderly cleaner leaned in, voice breaking. I worked for Ms. Veronica for 12 years. Not once did she ask my name. Amara gently held her hand. Starting today, she said, no one here will ever be unseen again. Veronica Whitmore sat alone in her Beverly Hills mansion, staring out over the manicured lawn where once she had hosted charity galas and media interviews. Now, silence. Her calls went unanswered. Her influence had evaporated. And the girl she once dismissed as just the maid's daughter now held the reins of the empire she believed would be hers by birthright. She doesn't deserve this, Veronica whispered to herself. A black girl. Not even a Whitmore. But deep inside, a bitter truth gnawed at her. Harold had looked at Amara with a light in his eyes, a light Veronica had never received. She opened her phone, crafting a statement to send to the media, words dressed as righteousness but laced with vengeance. Then her hand froze. A photo lit up the screen. Amara sitting with janitors and cafeteria staff, laughing, eating, listening. And in that moment, Veronica felt something she couldn't explain. Not rage, not regret, but emptiness. Because power built on exclusion will always crumble. And the girl she once tried to erase had become something she could never be. Ricardo Whitmore, Harold's firstborn, once the presumptive heir, sat frozen in his late father's former office. Now it belonged to a girl he once ordered to fetch water. Troy had raged. Veronica had plotted. But Ricardo was just empty. He'd spent his life believing his birthright was secure, that legacy meant possession. But Amara, a 17-year-old black girl from the margins, had redefined everything. He'd watched her, how she walked into meetings unshaken, how she spoke not to impress but to uplift. "She's more composed than I've ever been," he whispered, ashamed. That afternoon he stood outside her door, not for power, not for revenge, but to listen. "Amara," he said softly, "I was wrong, about you, about everything. But if you'll let me, I want to learn." She looked up, no triumph in her eyes, just stillness. She didn't speak, but her silence didn't close the door. It cracked it open. That evening, Amara held a private leadership meeting with senior staff, both new and old. On the table were plans to restructure Whitmore Industries into a socially responsible enterprise, one that prioritized people over profit. She stood calmly. "We're not just building profits anymore," she said. "We're building something just." Then she turned and everyone froze. "Ricardo," she said, "you'll lead our leadership renewal program. Not because of your name, but because it's time you learned how to earn respect." Silence. No one spoke. Marcus leaned back, surprised. Lydia blinked. But Ricardo stood, eyes glistening. "I won't waste the chance," he said, voice cracking. Amara nodded, then turned to the room. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the past," she said, "but it gives us something far more powerful, a chance at a new future." And with that, the meeting didn't end. It began. 3 months into her leadership, Amara began renovations on Whitmore's ground floor. Gone were the oil paintings of dead European aristocrats. In their place, bold, bright murals painted by children from South LA. Portraits of janitors, receptionists, line workers, the hands that built the empire. They called it the Gallery of the Forgotten. On opening day, Amara stood in silence as elderly employees, some retired, some once invisible, walked through the exhibit. "I've never seen my face on a wall," one whispered, eyes wet. "I worked here 32 years. Amara took his hand. "It's about time we honored the builders, not just the owners." Veronica stood outside the glass doors watching. No one saw her wipe a tear from her cheek. But she did. Because for the first time she realized legacy wasn't marble statues or stock portfolios. It was memory. It was meaning. And she'd built none of it. Veronica finally came. No cameras, no PR team. Just a woman holding the last scraps of her dignity, stepping into the office of the girl she once dismissed as background. "I didn't come to apologize," she said, voice brittle. "I'm not sure I know how." Amara didn't flinch. She poured tea, waited. Veronica sat. "I've hated you," she admitted. "Not because you stole anything, but because you reminded me of everything I've never been." Amara's eyes didn't harden. Instead, they softened in a way that made Veronica feel even smaller. "I don't need you to apologize," Amara said gently. "I need you to see." Veronica looked down, ashamed. "How do you forgive people who hurt your mother?" she asked, broken. Amara took a breath. "By understanding that anger is a cage, and my mother raised me to be free." Veronica said nothing more. But that night she left behind the key. 1 year after the infamous will reading, Whitmore Industries had a new name, Lumina. Not to erase the past, but to illuminate the future. At the unveiling ceremony, no CEO gave a speech. Instead, a 9-year-old girl from a local housing project stepped up. "Miss Amara saw me," she said, clutching the mic, "when no one else did." The room was still. Ricardo teared up. Veronica sat in the back, hands clasped, unsure if she belonged. Amara didn't stand on the stage that night. She sat beside her mother, Amara Johnson, now in remission, her eyes glowing with pride. As the little girl finished speaking, applause erupted. And in that moment, Amara felt something deeper than triumph. Peace. Because she understood now what Harold meant when he said power isn't what we keep. It's what we give to those the world refuses to see. In a quiet moment before sunrise, Amara found a sealed envelope tucked beneath a drawer in her new office. It was addressed in Harold Whitmore's unmistakable handwriting, "For Amara, when you feel the world doubting you most." Her hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. "Dear Amara, if you're reading this, it means you chose courage over silence. I knew you would." Tears welled in her eyes. You see, power without empathy is destruction. But I saw something in you the others refused, to the ability to lead with both steel and grace. My only hope was to plant a seed. You made it a garden. Amara read the last line over and over again. Thank you for reminding me in my final days that the soul of an empire is not its wealth, but its heart. She held the letter to her chest, and for the first time since Harold died, she allowed herself to cry, not from pain, but from being seen. That night, Amara walked through the empty company garden where her mother used to sit during her cleaning breaks. There, sitting alone under a lantern, was Troy, the man who had once spat at her feet. He stood as she approached. I don't expect anything, he said. Not your forgiveness, not your time. But I wanted to say, I remember your mother. She always smiled at me, even when I didn't deserve it. Amara said nothing. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a photo. It was of Delilah years ago, wiping down the company plaque. She once told me, Troy whispered, dirt washes off easier than hate. I didn't understand her then, but now, I think I do. Amara's throat tightened. You think words are enough? She asked softly. No, he said, but maybe action can be. And he turned, walked toward the shelter she'd founded, and began volunteering anonymously. Amara watched, and for the first time, she let him go. Delilah Johnson stood in front of a group of young interns on their first day at Lumina. She held no titles, no degrees, but when she spoke, the room listened. I used to mop this floor, she began, praying no one would notice me. And now, my daughter owns it. The interns leaned forward. But I don't want you to look at her and think, that could never be me. Because it can. If you carry your name with dignity, if you work like every day is a chapter in your story. One girl raised her hand. How did you raise a leader? She asked. Delilah smiled. I didn't raise a leader, she said. I raised a girl to survive. She chose to lead. Later, as Amara hugged her mother backstage, Delilah whispered in her ear, I don't need statues or speeches. You are my legacy. And Amara, for all her wealth and power, knew that was the greatest title she'd ever own. Months later, Amara sat down for a national TV interview. The host leaned in, eyes gleaming. You're the first Black teenage woman to inherit a multi-billion-dollar empire. What do you say to the people who said you didn't belong? Amara looked into the camera, and then she smiled. I didn't come here to belong, she said. I came to build. The internet exploded. Clips of her interview were shared millions of times. Young girls quoted her words in classrooms. Mothers cried behind phone screens. CEOs scribbled down her name. But Amara wasn't chasing fame. She was chasing impact. If I'm remembered for anything, she said, I hope it's not the money I inherited, but the humanity I restored. The host blinked, caught off guard. You believe one person can change a system? He asked. Amara answered without hesitation. No, but one person can light the fire, and thousands will carry it forward. 5 years later, Lumina became the nation's leading model for equitable business. But on her 23rd birthday, Amara did something no one expected. She stepped down. In her final address, she stood in the same office she once feared entering, her voice calm, unwavering. I didn't come to rule, she said. I came to rebuild. She passed the CEO role to a young woman from the very same neighborhood where she'd grown up. And then she walked out of the boardroom hand in hand with her mother toward the community center they had just opened. Her legacy wasn't the empire. It was every girl who now dared to dream, every boy who now saw dignity in his mother's labor, every soul who no longer had to ask permission to exist. In a world that once mocked her for daring to enter, she left the door wide open for everyone else. True wealth isn't measured by inheritance or status, but by empathy, integrity, and the courage to do what's right even when the world doubts you. Amara's story teaches us that where you start doesn't define who you'll become. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the most powerful truths,